There's a clinician out there spending 10 hours a week on work that doesn't need her clinical license. She's doing it because she thinks getting help is a luxury that she can't afford. She has it backwards. Welcome to the Clinical CEO podcast. Build the business your future self will thank you for. Welcome back to the Clinical CEO. I'm Jessica Echeverry, and this is episode number 6. Last week, we did the math. You wrote down the number your practice has to produce to support the life that you want. And for almost all of you, it was a lot bigger than what your practice is producing right now. I told you that there's only 3 ways to close that gap. Raise your fees, add revenue that isn't you seeing clients one at a time, or both. Today, we go after a piece that sits right next to that math. It's not about what you charge and it's not what else you sell. It's what you do with the hours that you already have and whether those hours are going to work that only you can do or getting eaten alive by work that anyone or anything could do for you. Let me paint a picture and you tell me if you recognize her. It's a Sunday night. She's done with clients for the week. She should be resting. Instead, she's at the kitchen table with her laptop open and she's catching up. She's confirming next week's appointments because 2 clients didn't respond to the reminder that she had sent by hand. She's answering 3 prospective client emails that all ask the same question that she's answered 100 times. What do you charge? Do you take my insurance? Do you do virtual? She's chasing a claim that got denied. She's resending an intake form that somebody never filled out. She's updating her calendar because somebody rescheduled. And by the time that she actually closes her laptop, it's late. She's tired. She hasn't done a single thing that required her license, her training, or the 8 years that she has spent actually being a clinician. That's most of you. Not because you're disorganized, because nobody ever told you that this part of the work could be carried by something other than your own 2 hands. Here's the part that most of us miss. The average solo clinician that I consult with spends somewhere between 8 to 15 hours a week on work that doesn't actually require her license. Scheduling, intake forms, benefits checks, session reminders, billing follow-ups, answering the same 5 questions to prospective clients on repeat, chasing no-shows, logistic emails. I mean, I could go on and on and on here. Let's just call it 11 hours a week on average. Now let's put a dollar figure on that because this is the part that actually wakes people up. If you charge $150 a session and you spend 11 hours a week on admin, you're spending the equivalent of $1,600 a week of your clinical rate time on tasks a system or an assistant could handle for $20 or $30 an hour. Never mind if you hired a VA. Run that across a whole working year, and that's tens of thousands of dollars of your clinical rate time poured into work that nobody needs you or your license to do. Sit on that because that's not a small number. Certainly isn't pocket change. That is, for at least a lot of you, the difference between the practice you have and the practice that you wrote down last week. You are sitting on the revenue that you actually need and is just buried under admin. Most of you hear that and you think, I can't afford to hire someone. And I understand that thought. I had it too. I get it. But you've got the math all mixed up. You're already paying for the help. You're paying the highest possible price for the lowest possible work. You can't afford not to fix this. Today, I want to talk about one of the ways that I've closed that gap in my own clinics, which is AI. We're going to get into what it can actually do inside of a clinical practice, what it absolutely cannot do, and how to think about it without believing all of that hype, or on the opposite side, refusing to look at it at all. I've spent the last few years building this into the operations of my own practices across 2 countries. So I know what it's like to build this into a practice. I'm speaking from a space of what's actually running right now while I sit here recording this. But before I go any further, I need to actually clear something up because it's the thing that makes clinicians just slam the door before the conversation even starts. When a clinician hears AI in your practice, she pictures a chatbot doing therapy, a robot in the room, a machine pretending to care about a human being in pain, And she's absolutely right to be horrified of that because that would be a betrayal of everything that this work is. But that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I recommend. And it's not what runs any of my own personal clinics. The therapy in my clinics is done by therapists. The clinical judgment belongs to the licensed humans. That's not up for debate. And it's certainly not the future of your clinic that I'm describing. This conversation today is everything that is around the therapy, the scheduling, the reminders, the intake logistics, the billing follow up, the same 5 questions answered for the 1,000th time, the work that takes absolutely no clinical judgment, but eats up 5, 10, 15 hours of your week. That's the bucket that we're emptying out today. Whether you actually bring AI into your clinic or not, it's not an ideological decision. It's a structural one. You need to hear the difference because clinicians get stuck with the ideology when the real question is structure. Every hour of your week goes to one of 3 places: clinical work, so that's the thing that you can do with your license; building the business, the thing that actually grows it; or admin, the thing that something or someone other than you can do. The math of your practice is literally divided between how those 3 buckets are split up. When the admin bucket is overflowing, the other 2 are starving. The business simply can't produce the revenue that you wrote down last week. There simply aren't enough hours left in your calendar. AI is the one way to move those hours out of the admin bucket and back into the other 2 things. Hiring an assistant is another way. Better systems are another. A cleaner intake process is another. AI is only one of the options on a bigger menu of ways that you can change this. And I want to be super honest that it isn't always the right one. Sometimes the right answer is a human assistant. And sometimes it's a better piece of software with no AI in it at all, if you can find one of those nowadays. But if you have been ruling out AI on principle, refusing to even look at it, then your principles are making a business decision for you, and it's costing you the very shift that would let you do more of the clinical work that you got into this profession to do. So let's get tactical, because I promised you that this season would always give you something to do and not just something to think about. If you've never used any AI tools beyond maybe writing a report in ChatGPT, here's how I want you to think about the first move. Don't start with the most impressive thing. Don't start with the thing that you saw someone post about online. Start with that task that happens the most often in your week and requires the least clinical judgment. High frequency, low judgment. That's your entry point because that's where you get the most time back for the least risk. For almost every practice that I know, that's the front door. It's the scheduling, the reminders, and the same handful of questions every prospective client asks before they ever book a session with you. And let's be honest, those 3 things are usually the single biggest chunk of your admin hours. And they're the lowest risk place to let the system carry the weight because none of it is clinical. So let's dive into this and get out of the abstract and let's actually look at what your first week would look like. You don't overhaul everything, you pick one workflow. Let's say the prospective client questions, the ones that you answer by email over and over and over. Maybe you even have a template for them. On Monday, you're going to do just one thing. You're going to write down just once the answers that you always give: your fees, your availability, what you treat and what you don't, how telehealth works, what happens in the first session, whether you take insurance, and if so, which panels. You can even write it out the way that you would actually say it in your own warm voice, because that's what makes it not feel like a machine. And on Tuesday, you're going to set up a tool to handle those questions inside of your booking flow with anything that it can't confidently answer routed straight to you. Anything sensitive, anything clinical, anything that smells like a real human in distress reaching out goes to you. The system handles the logistics. You handle the humans. That's week one workflow. A few hours to set up, a small monthly cost, usually way less than what you'd even spend on a lunch in a week. And from that point forward, it will give you back your time every single week forever without you lifting a finger. And the next week, you're going to add the next workflow: reminders and no-show follow-ups. which for most of you is leaking real money. A simple automated reminder sequence, a confirmation the day before, a gentle nudge for anyone who hasn't confirmed. It cuts your no-show and it stops you from being the one texting on a Sunday night to see whether they're going to actually show up that week. And the week after that, you tackle intake, the forms, the consents, the benefit information, collected and organized before your client ever walks in. Of course, these all have to be done through systems who can actually hold information safely. We're going to come back to that safety piece because it really matters. So now you're building it one piece at a time, just like I've told you to build everything else on this show. Not all at once, not in a heroic weekend that leaves you fried. One thing, then the next, then the next. And by the end of a few months, you've handed off most of the work that's been stealing your evenings and you didn't burn yourself out doing it. I keep a specific tools of what I'm currently using in the show notes because the list changes faster than this episode will ever age. AI tools are constantly changing, but the principle of this won't. Start with the highest frequency, the lowest judgment tasks, get your time back, and then move up from there. Now, the safety side, because this is probably the most important part of this. And it honestly matters more than every single minute that you will save by using AI. There are things that you should not be handing to AI, and I want to name them super clearly because this is where clinicians get into real trouble. First, do not use it for clinical judgment, not diagnoses, not treatment planning, not risk assessment, definitely not crisis response. Anything that actually requires your license stays with you and your clinicians, full stop. A tool can draft a reminder text. It can't decide whether client is safe to leave a session. That's yours. It will always be yours. Number 2, and I want this burned into your brain. Do not put client information into tools that were never built to hold it. The free chatbot that you use to brainstorm a blog caption is not the place to paste client history. Not ever. Not to save time, not for any reason, ever. And here's the rule I run my businesses on. And I want you to really consider taking this stance too. Anywhere a client's information lives, an AI system cannot run it unless that system is built and contractually committed to protecting the client's personal health information. HIPAA compliant in the US, FIPA or your provincial equivalent in Canada, and it has to have a signed contract agreement in place. And the clinical work itself, the judgment, the care, the relationship, it's never AI's job. That line does not move for anyone for any reason, no matter how busy you are. Now, with that line drawn, let me be honest with you about how far this actually gets me, because I don't want you to think that I keep AI in a tiny little box marked scheduling. I use AI across nearly every part of my business, not just my secretary work, my content, my marketing, my copywriting, building out lessons inside my courses, drafting the operations documents and the standard procedures that my teams run on, researching, organizing, structuring. First drafts of almost everything isn't clinical. AI is woven through the entire operation, and it has given me back an extraordinary amount of time and let me build at a speed that I could have never touched on my own. But here's that important piece again. It's never anywhere that a client's information lives, and it never does clinical work. Those two worlds stay completely, permanently separate. The marketing world, the operations world, the content world, it's wide open because there's no client data in it and no clinical judgment in it. The client world is protected and sealed and compliant and human where it needs to be human. Once you've drawn that line cleanly, that risk that you're so worried about pretty much disappears. And you get to use this everywhere it's actually safe to use it, which turns out to be a whole lot of places. So how do you know if a tool is safe for the client side, you ask? Before you hand any client information to any system, you ask the vendor a short list of questions, and you do not need to skip it because you're in a hurry. Where's the data stored and who can access it? Is it compliant with the law in your jurisdiction? Will they sign a business associate agreement or a data processing agreement, putting that commitment in writing? Is your data used to train other models? And if so, can you turn that off? And can you delete it completely on request? If your vendor can't answer those clearly and in writing, then that's your answer. You walk away no matter how good the demo looked. I have walked away from so many tools that I loved because they couldn't sign the agreement, and I have never once regretted it. Our clients' trust is not something to be gambled with just to save some time. I want to steelman the clinician who refuses to touch any of this because they are making a real point, and I respect it. A lot of clinicians feel that bringing automation into a relational practice is fundamentally at odds with the work. That the warmth, the humanity, the sense of being cared for by another person is the entire point, and that any machine loop will erode that. And it's not a silly concern. It comes from the right place and it's the right instinct, but it's just pointed at the wrong target. Here's what I've found in my own practices, and I mean found the hard way over years. When admin runs cleanly, the clinical work has more room to be human, not less. The hours that I used to actually lose to the scheduling are now hours that I spend preparing for a hard session. The hour I lost to billing follow up is now an hour that I can actually spend in consultation with a colleague on a difficult case. The hour that used to go to chasing intake forms is now an hour that I can actually spend present in the session that follows instead of half thinking about my inbox. The hour that I used to spend chasing the intake forms is now an hour that I can actually spend in my business growing it so I can reach more people, more clients. The tools haven't made my practices less human. They've given me and my team back the part of us that had been spent on the work that nobody needed us to be in. That humanity belongs in the room with the client. That's sacred, and we protect that fiercely. The schedule is not sacred. The benefit verification is not sacred. Protect the first with everything that you have and automate the rest without guilt. Let me project a little because I want you to see where this is going so you're not caught in surprise. A clinician running her practice 5 years from now is going to have the most of her front of house handled by systems, booking, reminders, intake, basic logistic communications, billing follow up, all of it running through compliant tools that do the work in the background. The clinical work stays with her, in her hands where it belongs. The operational scaffolding around it largely runs itself. The clinician who actually starts building that now will have a 5-year head start on the ones who wait until they're forced onto them. And it's going to be forced onto them by clients that expect it and by the simple economics of practices that have it competing against those who don't. I personally would much rather be early and deliberate about this than late and panicked. Early, you get to choose your tools, draw your lines, and build on your terms. Late, you're scrambling. And after years of consulting, I already know that this is a real obstacle for many of you, and it isn't technical. Most clinicians resisting these tools aren't standing on a considered ethical position. They're afraid of learning something new in a field that already demands everything of them, afraid of making a mistake with a client's information, afraid of being seen as maybe not a serious clinician or as someone who took a shortcut, just afraid of the change itself, of becoming a person who runs a business with systems instead of sheer effort. And those are human reactions, and I'm not dismissing a single one of them. I had every one of them when I started building systems in my first practice. I resisted it for years. I told myself that doing it by hand was more caring, more personal, more me. It wasn't. It was just more exhausting. And the exhaustion was leaking into my actual therapy room with my clients, whether I admitted it or not. But a feeling, my friends, is not a business plan. And if you let that feeling make this decision, it will keep you exactly where you are at the kitchen table on a Sunday night doing $20 work with your $150 hands, year after year, wondering why the number never moves. You don't have to use every tool that I'm going to mention in the show notes. You don't have to do it all this month. You just have to be willing to look at this honestly. Draw your line where the client information starts, put in the pieces that help, and not let the fear of change be the thing that decides your future for you. So here's the assignment, and it's small on purpose. Pick one workflow the single most repetitive, low judgment task of your week. The thing that you do over and over that doesn't require your license. For most of you, it's going to be the prospective client questions or the appointment reminders. Write down this week exactly how you do it, step by step. That's it. You don't even have to set up a single tool this week if you don't want to. You just have to name the task and write down the steps, because the moment it's written down, it's something that you can actually hand off, whether that's to a system or a person. You can't delegate what only lives in your head. Get it out of your head and onto a page. That's where this whole thing starts. If you want to be around other clinicians who are working through all of this in real time, asking the questions that maybe you're just too embarrassed to ask anyone else, come on into the Clinical CEO Collective. It's our free community, and the links are in the show notes. Next week, we go somewhere a little harder. Each week is a step towards it. I'm going to talk about the clinician that I see more than any other in my consulting work. The one who knows exactly what she needs to change and consistently does not change it. If that sentence made you uncomfortable, good. Come on back. That's the next episode. That episode is for you. This is the Clinical CEO. I'm Jessica Echeverry. Build the practice your future self will thank you for.